So, as I said, we've got Rupert, who has been coming to church for a while, but we'll hear more about his story, but we're excited to hear about what God has been doing in his life. And also, if you're sat there at any point and think, I've got a story to share, don't shy away, let us know, because there's plenty of opportunity to share your testimony as well. But, Rupert, who are you?
A question I ask myself all the time. My story, like many in Jersey, begins in St Helier, Jersey General Hospital.
Nice.
In a wonderful Saturday in March 1995. So I was born and raised in Jersey. My family was originally from Northern Ireland. They came over on holiday. It was raining in Belfast. They came here. It was nice and sunny. They went back to Belfast and it was raining. And they thought, why not just move to Jersey? And
solid logic.
So I grew up. My family wasn't particularly religious, but it was from a Protestant background, so I knew there were Protestants and I knew there were Catholics. I would watch Father Ted with my grandmother when I visited her house. I went to Church of England schools, both here and in Winchester. Sung hymns, did RS, didn't really think much about it. Life was okay until, unfortunately, my mother got cancer for the first time when I was 12 years old. And my parents got divorced at the same time because my father thought it was a brilliant time. And then I was sent away to boarding school in London because my mother thought it was the best way to protect my brother and I. So when I was at boarding school, we had to go to chapel 3 days a week. It was a freezing cold building. We would have to wear tailcoats on a Sunday. And there used to be a fight to get over the radiators because they were in the ground. So and also they had a terrible habit because of tailcoats, the people on the pew behind you would tie your tails to the pew. So when you tried to stand up to sing, you would take the whole pew with you. So I didn't really have an interest in religion. I viewed myself as agnostic. And unfortunately, life in my family got more difficult when I was at boarding school.
Okay, cool. It seems to me like it was a very good whistle stop. I appreciate that. We've got a good history there. It seems like it's interesting because sort of an Irish family, there's quite a lot of like religious tradition that exists within sort of Irish tradition. And there's also this sort of constant exposure, but yet some of it sort of jokey through the sort of Father Ted stuff. And then going to a Christian school is always a bit interesting because you kind of sing the songs and then you crack on doing whatever else. And so it's interesting that you have this whole sort of theme running through your life of faith, but it didn't necessarily stick. And it's always made harder, I think, as well, when life isn't always straightforward. And so how, from that place, you obviously know of God, but not really that bothered. You've seen the shows, you've been to the schools, but how did you go from being just sort of generally agnostic and not really that interested to being someone who has a deeper interest in the person of Christ? Obviously, you've told us to where you are in high school, but I wonder how that interest shifted from I know about it to I want to know about it.
I'm laughing because I always think it's a bit embarrassing because people have great stories about it, and mine was...
this is a good story, I like your story.
So like many children, obviously, I played video games, and I had always loved Westerns. I'd ridden horses. And so on my birthday, I think I was 14, my mother got me a Western game called Call of Juarez, Bound in Blood. It was about two brothers who were former Confederate soldiers turned outlaws and their descent into crime and evil, but they had a third, younger brother who was a priest who would try and bring them back and try and save them. And as the brother tries to save them, he would quote from the Bible. And as the next mission was loading, he would read quotes, and I thought, you know what? This is amazing. This is the best thing I've ever heard. And it was strange. And it turns out the game developer was a Polish Christian game company. And so I played my way through the game, got to the end, and I thought, you know what? This is amazing. I need to learn more. So I spoke to the school's Anglican priest. There was an Anglican and a Catholic one at my boarding school, and his name was Father Power. And so I spoke to Father...
It's a great name, by the way,
yeah,
Father Power.
Father Power, yes. And so he recommended I read the Gideon's Bible that we had all been given. So I read my way through all the Gospels.
And that's it. it's really interesting to me how, like, you know how there's like a formula for how you introduce people to Jesus. Call of Juarez or whatever it was is not normally my first go-to. You should play this crazy violent Western game about deviant people and a priest. I like it. I think what's also interesting is other people have shared their testimony, and media God has a way of using all things, and I think even our stories or situations or our church, or you find reasons not to show people things or to tell people about things, but God can use anything, including the Call of Juarez, a game, to spark an interest in you. I think that's really cool. It's also wild that they just randomly decided to put Bible quotes throughout the whole thing. Clearly the Polish game developer, also Polish game developer making a country and Western thing about a Palestinian Jew is a wild time. But I'm glad that you found it that way, and it's really encouraging. And somehow you found your way to an Anglican priest called Father Power. It's a good story. I like it. And it's cool how God was weaving the pieces together the whole time. And so you read your Gideon's Bible, and I assume it wasn't an instantaneous conversion at that point. So you've described to me about, it being more of a journey, your thing, of like seeing a bit of Jesus here and then experience like a bump in the road or many bumps in the road. And so I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how life continued to progress and how that...
Yes, so I took a year out in between boarding school and university because unfortunately my mother got cancer again. So I stayed looking after my mother and working at the front desk of the zoo. I then went to university where I studied zoology. In my first year, a friend of mine took me to Alpha, and so I completed the course. I also felt that my study of zoology led me towards it because I was studying paleontology, evolution, the complex patterns of life, and I distinctly remember looking down the microscope in one of the labs and I saw a paramecium, which is a microscopic organism almost dancing, and I just thought someone had to have made this. And so there's a great quote from Werner Heisenberg, who was the main pioneer of quantum mechanics and nuclear physics, and he said, "The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you." I then looked into all the other famous scientists. I've just gone through all these scientists who are Christian. Michael Faraday, discoverer of electromagnetics, Gregor Mendel, a monk who discovered genetic inheritance, Arthur Compton, wave-particle duality, George Maitre, Catholic priest who came up with the Big Bang Theory, Ronald Fisher discovered the link between Mendel's inheritance and the theory of evolution, Theodosius Jovansky, founder of evolutionary genetics, Mary Anning, the famous paleontologist Richard Owen, who created paleontology, who coined the term dinosaur, Francis Collins of the Human Genome Project, and in The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin said, God is responsible for this. And as C.S. Lewis said, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver.
I think that's really, again, just really interesting. How, like, again, not your first port of call to be like, hey, why don't you look at this weird, funky thing under a microscope? And it's so cool to me how God used these things that are so personal to you and so on ball with what you care and concerned about, and use them to bring you to him, to knowledge of himself. And I think that is something that seems to me, through when you tell your story, seems to be quite a clear thread throughout all of it, that actually things are going on in your life that are difficult and you've got mixed bag of influence, yet God uses the very things that would impact you to sort of reveal himself to you. And I think that is very cool about God. And it's cool to hear you even listing off all these people I'll never remember and what they do. But I think it's fun that a guy actually came up with the term dinosaur. You don't think that, do you, until you do. But it's cool that, like, so many of these sort of influential people in science had some awareness, if not a complete faith in Christ, and yet you yourself found yourself, through your exploration of that, getting a deeper desire to know Christ. I do like that quote about the cub. It's a good one. I like that. Some people could say the same thing about theology, but there we are. And so, thank you. That's someone that studied theology, friends. So I guess you had all this thing, and you're continuing to sort of see how God is slowly revealing himself to you and deepening this desire. And so from sort of where you've come to this position where you think there must be a God, I wondered if you could explain maybe what it was that brought you to a real point of commitment, of saying, actually, it's not just a thing I believe could be real, or maybe there should be real. It's something that's real to me. And so could you tell us a bit about what life was like and how you made that sort of final decision to actually, no, I'm going to live my life for Jesus, not just learn about it?
Yes, I have to say, despite all of what I've said, there was still a part of me that I felt that I was on the edge of a cliff, and I couldn't make that final leap of faith, as it were. And so I had been introduced to St. Paul's through my Christian union at university, because some people from there were doing doctor's placements in Jersey, and they said, oh, Rupert, you're from Jersey, you don't go to church there, come to St. Paul's. So during the holidays, I would come to St. Paul's with them, and then I would come on and off, really. And then I tried to make it more regular, and I remember I'd sit at the back in the corner over there, and we'd have people come up, talk about, oh, these miracles. I would just sit there going, really? And then say, go there, and they'd say, and I was completely healed. And you go, and then COVID came along, and I'm sure you all remember COVID. And near the beginning, I unfortunately contracted COVID, and just as I started to get better, I really completely nosedived. I was bedridden for essentially 6 months. I had non-stop migraines. I was in and out of hospital. I was hallucinating. I was in and out of brain scans. They took lots of blood tests. They found out my immune system was going completely haywire. It didn't know what was going on. It was producing all sorts of antibodies, including some for tropical African parasites. And it was quite strange. And then I started to improve, and I started to come into St. Paul's more regularly. I had this is the biggest shock of the evening, that I did zoology, was a zookeeper briefly at the zoo. Then I became an accountant. And then, so I was still doing my accountancy, and then I started, and had to stop that when I was sick. And then I started to feel better, went back to accounting, but I still had terrible brain fog. I couldn't remember anything. I would forget people's names. And then one day, it was the church weekend last year, I think Bishop of Bolton came, and I can't remember what it was meant to be about, but then someone said that they got a message that it was to be about healing. And then they talked about specifically healing for men, because men don't ask for help. And I thought, well, I should go up. And I remember the bishop was standing there, and I thought, I'll go to the bishop, because, he's got a more direct line to God. And I also did a horrible joke. I thought, I'll break the ice, because it's awkward going up to bishop asking for healing. So I said, sorry, I couldn't help but notice you're a bishop, but you walked straight up the aisle. I thought bishops could only move diagonally.
Did he like the joke?
He did.
Good.
He said he'd never heard it before, which is just,
That's high praise.
And then so after breaking the ice, I decided, I'll tell him why I'm here. I said, I've had horrendous brain fog, gave him the explanation. Then he said, all right, can I lay hands? And I thought, okay. And then so he plonked his hands down on my head, and he prayed. And then it finished, and he was like, oh, did you feel anything? I was a bit disappointed, because I thought, it would be boom. And then I said, well, I guess when you did pray and put your hands on my head, I felt a wave move from the right half of my brain to the left half, kind of like that. And then he was like, oh, okay. And then, because he was here for the whole weekend, I then went to lunch with some of the St. Paul's young adults. And progressively throughout the day, it felt almost like there was a breeze moving from the right half of my head to the left half of the head, and it was almost carrying the brain fog completely away. And by the end of the day, the brain fog was completely gone. And, in that moment, I thought, well, hey, I guess, I can't deny it, because it's gone through something that was completely debilitating for me to be almost gone completely.
What a story. I love that. Come on now. I think I like how honest you are about how like it can be, when you haven't had any experience of that, it can be you can get to quite a cynical place, and it's just cool that that opportunity was provided and that God just healed you in such a powerful way. It's really cool. I also like how it felt like a wind. That's literally how fog clears. Isn't that crazy? God is good. So I guess at that point you were like, I now need a decision to make. And so I guess, did that feel like an instant thing? Did that feel like something that you needed to, how did that come about? Or did you just crack on, was like, oh, well, I guess I follow Jesus now properly?
Well, I kind of was, because of that and another point, I had a very interesting dream. And so I dreamt I was in a completely white void, and I met a man, and his face was pure darkness. It was almost like a black hole. And I instantly knew in this dream who this was. This was obviously Satan. And he said to me, Rupert, if you kneel before me, I'll give you your greatest dream, which I'll confess now because it is quite embarrassing. My greatest dream would be to go back in time, start my life again, warn my mother to get herself seen earlier, prevent all the catastrophes from happening to my family, maybe make a few strategic bets along the way, you know. And then instantly, without being tempted whatsoever, I can't say what I actually said to him, but I'll put it politely. I said, could you please go away? Jesus Christ is King. And at that point, he went poof and disappeared. And so the next day, I remember I went to, because I was going to life group at that point with you and Pete, and I remember talking to you. And you said, oh, maybe you should read some of the Bible passages, see into it. And I thought it was amazing that it was referencing passages I didn't really know existed. And so I thought, well, you know, I think that dream has completely solidified my opinion on the matter.
Cool. And so you sort of gave your life to Christ based on that sort of those two instances where you're like, it's undeniable, irrefutable who Christ is to you. And I do think it's amazing how God's been at work in your life. And so you've been a Christian now for some time. And so how has your life been since you've sort of given your life more fully to Jesus?
I think a lot more peace. I know there's a line in Christ alone where they talk about no fear of death, no guilt in life. This is the power of Christ in me. And I feel a lot calmer. I feel I'm more strengthened, and I feel myself grow. For example, I've helped on 2 Alpha courses now. I've helped on practicing the way. And also I think my attitude to it has changed a lot. And I mentioned one here that I was at work, and then I remember I think I went to the loo and I was washing my hands and I saw there was a lump in my neck in the mirror. And so I go back to my desk and you're kind of like, oh no. And obviously, given my family's experience, and my own experience doing zoology, because we have to do biomedical sciences for a year, that I knew about cancers, and I knew, it was a hard lump in my lymph node, and I thought, oh, this is bad news, what do I do? And so the first thing I did was I went home, and then I prayed about it, and what was interesting, it actually shocked me, almost what I said. I just said, well, if this is cancer, God, well, then it's your will, and thank you very much for giving me 30 years of life. And I said, that was it, and I said, I hope that my friends and family would understand that if I were to die, that at least then I would go to join God, and that they would find some comfort in that. But I found that quite strange, and because I had an epiphany that I think a lot of us think that God takes things away, but we have to remember God is the one who gives things. You know, for example, I have 15 years with my grandmother, several months with my grandfather, who I got into contact with when I was 18 after he was estranged from my family. I have 14 years with my childhood dog. And for that, I'm truly thankful, because I think a lot of the time we do think God takes things away, but we forget he's the one who gives it in the first place. And so that shocked me, because I remember thinking, was talking to, I think, Esther once, and we were talking about things that were going on in people, things like, for example, what's happening to you with your housing, if you don't mind me mentioning, because you've shared it with you. And you said that the first thing you and your wife did was pray about it, and I was saying to Esther, if that happened to me, the first thing I would think about is where I'm going to live, you know, start calling up, looking around flats, and I thought, I'd really like to be that person. So I was quite amazed that that had obviously I had been mature enough in the faith that the first thing I did was say, well, actually, thank you very much, and if this is your will, then so be it. And then fortunately, it was gone after the next few days. So.
Oh, wow. What a great thing. I think it's amazing that it shows as well that it wasn't, God is always at work in our hearts, and I think the more time we spend, the closer we draw near to him. The theme of